A new labor movement in the U.S. It's being called David versus Goliath, upstart unions versus powerful corporations.
Workers are forming unions in industries and companies that haven't seen them before.
It's like they're caught like a deer in the headlight, like they can't believe this is happening. But this is happening around the world.
I hear it, my God whisper in my ear, organize.
In this video, we'll look at how the political and social environment in the U.S. has created fertile ground for a fresh labor movement. We'll visit the state of North Carolina to find out how unionizing efforts are running up against one of the world's biggest corporations.
Amazon says that they want the associates to have a voice. Well, workers, collectively, that is a voice. It's nothing more democratic than a union.
And we'll look at a crucial question. Will all of this momentum actually reshape America's labor landscape?
I don't think, it's any guarantee whether these workers are going to succeed.
Employees just don't understand that employers also have rights during an active organizing campaign.
That's all coming up on this correspondent special of Business Beyond.
Let's start with some recent history here in the U.S. The last big wave of organizing was in the 1930s and the 1940s.
It was just after the Great Depression, and unions started to expand, especially with the passing of the National Labor Relations Act in 1935. It supported workers forming unions. By the 1950s, just over 35% of the labor force was unionized. But in the decades that followed, those numbers declined steadily as manufacturing jobs started to dry up, automation increased, and overseas markets opened up. By 1983, only 20% of U.S. workers belonged to unions, and in 2021, that number had fallen to 10.3%.
The U.S. is definitely not alone in that trend. Trade union membership has dropped across the globe, from Turkey to Japan. Here in the U.S., the rise of more precarious working conditions, like in the gig economy, has made it harder for traditional unions to attract new members.
But there are some important nuances. For example, only around 8% of France's workforce is unionized, yet nearly all workers there are covered by collective bargaining agreements, contracts between an employer and a group of employees. We asked labor expert David Madland what really sets the U.S. apart from other countries when it comes to unions.
Our labor law is very weak. It gives corporations tremendous power and ability to fight unions in ways that are sort of unimaginable in many other countries. And the penalties if companies break the law and, for example, fire a worker for trying to join a union are incredibly weak. There is no monetary penalty for doing so. The most that the corporation might have to do is post a notice and rehire that worker and pay them back pay, minus anything they've earned in the meantime.
That law also prevents the type of sector-wide unions seen in countries like Germany. In the U.S., for example, workers can only go on strike against their direct employer, and they can't combine with other unions for collective bargaining.
Despite those odds, the tide appears to be turning. The number of petitions to unionize has jumped by nearly 60% since last October.
Starbucks has seen a surge in union activity. Nearly 200 stores have taken the first step towards forming a union. Amazon workers in Staten Island, New York, successfully filed a petition to form the company's first union. Corporations from Apple and Google to Target and Kellogg's have seen union activity too. Labor expert David Madland says most workers have faced 5 decades of near stagnant wages, while economic inequality has hit record levels. And in juggernauts like Amazon or Apple, workers are also under immense pressure to meet performance quota set by algorithms, with little control over changing their working conditions. Then the pandemic hit.
the American economy wasn't working very well for most workers. And then you had COVID, which really put those problems into stark relief, where workers were considered, essential, but they weren't paid more. They didn't necessarily have safe workplaces. And so workers really felt particularly vulnerable. At the same time, I saw the executives at their companies getting near record profits. So they were frustrated and ready to act.
But beneath all that activity, the number of U.S. workers in labor unions hasn't changed all that much. And we heard that U.S. labor laws still favor employers heavily. So is this really a new labor movement?
This is Ryan Brown. He's a former reverend who is now the president of CAUSE, Carolina Amazonians United for Solidarity and Empowerment, a group of Amazon workers in Durham, North Carolina, who are trying to form a union. Brown works on the main floor putting together packages. Last winter, he was told he would have to go to work in a department where COVID was spreading quickly, and he refused to go.
I prayed a long, hard prayer. And in that prayer, I heard my God whisper in my ear, organize.
Organizing has now become his ministry, coordinating with fellow colleagues and activists to demand better pay and working conditions.
Hey, Dietrich, I got you on the speakerphone and I'm in the middle of an interview. What's up? Are you outside?
Where are we? Where is the place that we're supposed to go to?
It starts at 5:45, and I'm en route now. What's good?
He's joined today by a small group of workers just beyond Amazon's property, handing out flyers to colleagues getting off shift.
You don't even have enough time to rest, to rejuvenate, or even to just digest your food. If you go to the restroom, that's what they call TOT, time off task. That's a possible write-up. Amazon has made our organizing very easy because everyone is extremely mad. And they all have this righteous anger because they see that this is an unjust place.
Amazon told us,
Amazon jobs come with an average starting pay of more than $18 an hour, well over twice the federal minimum wage, and hourly pay may go up to $28 per hour in some locations.
And on unions, the company added,
Our employees have the choice of whether or not to join a union. They always have. As a company, we don't think unions are the best answer for our employees.
Many of the workers here tell us they make below that $18 average, between $15.50 and $16 an hour, not enough to meet basic monthly costs like rent and car payments. And they are expected to meet unrealistic hourly targets too. They know getting Amazon to the table will be difficult, but they believe fighting to form a union is the only way.
I believe fully and wholeheartedly that we are going to do it, that it is going to happen, that we won't be ignored, that we're here, you've seen us here, you see us here today. To be quite honest, they don't know what to do because it's like they're caught like a deer in the headlight, like they can't believe this is happening. But this is happening around the world.
Many Americans agree with that sentiment. In fact, polls show that 68% of people approve of labor unions. That's the most popular unions have been in the U.S. in decades.
So if this is a new labor movement and it has plenty of support, what are its chances of succeeding? It's a mixed picture.
Janera Tice is an attorney who supported unions at the National Labor Relations Board for 10 years. Now she's helping companies as a labor lawyer.
I've sort of seen it on both sides. I think overwhelmingly employees just don't understand that employers also have rights during an active organizing campaign.
Those rights include being allowed to voice their opinion on unionization efforts, as long as they don't interfere with or coerce employees. As for the new generation of labor activists, Tice believes the jury is still out on whether they will see through what they've started.
If you look at millennials and Gen Zers, I think they're all very ambitious. And so the idea of being committed to working in one workplace for an extended career over time to the point where they could truly see a lot of the benefit of unionization is still sort of, out there as a question mark.
Beyond that commitment needed, there's another big challenge. Filing a petition to form a union is just a first step. Then comes the next step, getting at least 50% of workers' support in a union election. And then comes perhaps the most difficult step, getting their companies to the table to discuss wages and conditions.
Their battle is less than half over. They still then need to negotiate a collective bargaining agreement. And none of these sort of new waves have even succeeded at that yet.
And that might be the central point. This new wave of unionizing is not likely to change the country's labor landscape on its own. According to labor analysts, that would require tremendous grassroots pressure and deeper change. Support from elected officials to revamp labor laws in order to support workers and make collective bargaining easier. Such legislation has dim chances of making it through a very divided Congress. And with an economic downturn looming, labor experts warn that it will become more difficult for workers to build momentum in a recession as the labor market tightens up.
Still, workers across the country are starting to generate a national debate about the way we work and what rights we have. And that could make enough waves to push lawmakers here in Washington to act. And that's all for this edition of Business Beyond. We'd like to know what you think. What role do labor unions play in your country, and could we see a new global labor movement? Thanks for watching, and in the meantime, do check out our earlier episodes of Business Beyond.